Good morning. With general questions. Question number 1, Annabel Goldie.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking in response to reports that in the last year the conviction rate in criminal cases has fallen by 7%.
Cabinet Secretary Kenny McCaskill.
Well, there hasn't been a 7% fall in the conviction rate in criminal cases. The conviction rate, which is a proportion of court proceedings which resulted in the main charge being proven, was 87% in the year 2012-2013. This is the same as 2011-2012. There was a 7% fall in the total number of persons with a charge proven between 2011-12 and 2012-13. This, though, reflects a fall in the volume of court business, as recorded crime is at a 39-year low.
Annabel Goldie.
It is instructive, Presiding Officer, that with corroboration the conviction rate for sexual offences actually rose. Now, I know that with the best of intentions the Scottish Government wants to abolish corroboration, and the only certainties consequent upon that will be more prosecutions and more miscarriages of justice. There is certainly no certainty of more convictions. Given the controversy which this proposal has generated, would the Cabinet Secretary please consider, for the sake of all interested parties, removing this proposal from the current Justice Bill and referring it to an external group to consider and to advise?
Kenny McCaskill.
Well, I think the first thing to say is that the conviction rate for rape and sexual offences has risen because there has been increased reporting, and I think that's down to a variety of factors. It's down to an increase in awareness and actions taken by police and prosecutors with dedicated squads. It's an increase in willingness of people to report it because of the support, sympathy and treatment given to them, not simply by those law enforcement agencies, but by other agencies such as Victim Support Scotland, Rape Crisis Scotland and indeed Scottish Women's Aid. And also there are factors in terms of the media and the raising of awareness, certainly of historic abuse. It's for those reasons that people, to their great credit, great courage shown by them, have stepped forward. The increase in number of people reporting has resulted in an increase in convictions. We do still face significant challenges, though, in ensuring that we do ensure that things are improved. With regard to corroboration, this matter is with the Justice Committee. I will be giving evidence next year. I was speaking both yesterday with the faculty and today with the Law Society. I stand by the position given by the Lord Justice Clark. This is an archaic rule. It is not serving simply the victims of rape and sexual offences, but of domestic abuse, of those who have incapacities, whether they're aged or young. We do have to make sure that we provide access for justice, because the proposed change to corroboration is not about increasing a conviction rate. That is for the judiciary and for juries. It is about allowing access to justice, because at the present moment far too many people are denied even that access to justice.
Roy Campbell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that the decrease in the number of convictions for violent crimes, excluding homicide, although no cause for complacency, is a welcome step towards a safer society?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, of course, we shouldn't be complacent, but I think that the fall in violent crimes, excluding homicide, is welcome, and it reflects a 21% fall in the number of crimes of violence recorded by the police between 2011-12 and 2012-13. We also have to remember that the rate with regard to homicide fell 32% and indeed is at its lowest level since records began in 1976. But any crime of violence, any murder, is one too many. We require to continue to be ever vigilant. That is in terms of supporting law enforcement, making legislative changes where necessary, supporting the position for victims and witnesses, and indeed changing some cultural matters, in particular the abuse of alcohol at this time of year.
Question number 2 is in the name of Anne McTaggart. I note that the member is not in the chamber to ask her question. I'll expect an explanation by the end of the day. Question number 3, Drew Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the cost of promoting the White Paper on independence.
Cabinet Secretary Nicola Sturgeon.
As I indicated in my statement on the 26th of November, the total cost of the public information campaign to support the launch of Scotland's Future will be around £450,000.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, about the cost of a trip to the Gulf. The We understand that the Scottish Government took £800,000 from the Scottish Water budget to assist with the costs of promoting the White Paper and spent about £12,500 on the launch event at the Glasgow Science Centre. And we know that ministers will be embarking upon a roadshow next year to sell the White Paper. Can the Deputy First Minister confirm whether the costs of that roadshow will be met with the money taken from Scottish Water, or is it within the 450, or is it in fact within any other budget held by the Scottish Government?
Well, as I said in my statement, the cost of the public information campaign is around £450,000. I also said in my statement, and I will repeat again today, that I will keep Parliament updated on the final cost, total costs associated with the White Paper. Clearly, one of the key constraints in providing information to Parliament at this stage is that we are still getting very high demand for copies of the White Paper, and given the pleas that have been made from the opposition over the months for more information about what a yes vote in the referendum means, I would have thought they would have welcomed the fact that so many people are keen to access and to read the White Paper. So I'd be delighted to provide Drew Smith, if he hasn't already got it, with his own copy of the White Paper, and he's welcome to come to any of the roadshow events in order to educate himself about the benefits of independence. But seriously, Presiding Officer, I will, as is the obligation placed on me, ensure that Parliament is kept appropriately updated about the cost of the White Paper.
Question number 4, Nigel Dawn.
To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on how the UK Government's proposed energy market reforms will impact on the Scottish economy.
Minister, Fergus Ewing.
Presiding Officer, the UK Government has not yet acknowledged the need for different levels of support across the three main island groups, Orkney, Shetland and the Western Isles, a need identified by the research which was initiated by both governments. The single proposed strike price of £115 per megawatt hour falls short of the level required for some projects, especially in the Western Isles.
Nigel Dawn.
Minister, for his response, I'm wondering what impact the Minister thinks that the energy market reform will have on security of supply.
Minister.
Well, I share the serious concerns which have already been expressed with regard to security of supply by Ofgem and National Grid about the risk of blackouts over the coming years, especially in England. Electricity margins could drop to as little as 2% as early as 2015-2016. That's the excess of aggregate supply over peak demand. And that's a very slim margin indeed. So the Scottish Government is quite clear. We want to use the surplus electricity generated from renewable sources at record levels in Scotland now, 40% in 2012, not only to supply homes in Scotland, but also to keep the lights on to our good friends in England.
Question number 5, Willie Coffey.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government how it encourages public bodies to use social media as a means of communicating with the public.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government encourages public bodies to use social media, blogs, Twitter, Facebook and other channels. By this approach, the Scottish Government has demonstrated that social media is a powerful tool to communicate and engage with the public. The Scottish Government has developed policies for responsible use of social media and has made this available on its public-facing website for all to use, including public sector bodies.
Willie Coffey.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer? He will be aware of the huge potential of social media to keep the public informed, particularly with major incidents, with up-to-date news and events, often much faster than the traditional media can achieve. The recent events at the Clutha Bar showed how Police Scotland, for example, can get information out to people relatively quickly, but accurately too. And during the floods in Australia in 2010, the Queensland Police Service Facebook jumped from 17,000 to 100,000 hits in just 24 hours, showing the power that the media can achieve. Would the Cabinet Secretary do everything he can to further promote the use of social media in Scotland within our public bodies as a means of communicating directly and accurately with the people of Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Mr Coffey makes a number of very important points about the availability of information for members of the public, particularly during critical incidents, and his reference to the helicopter crash at the Clutha Bar was an illustrative example of how Police Scotland utilise social media to inform members of the public and to encourage the support and cooperation of members of the public, which of course has been a subject of significant note within this chamber. I can assure Mr Coffey that the Government is intent on using all of these channels of communication to assist in dealing with the proactive sharing of information to ensure that members of the public are able to, for example, plan journeys. The Traffic Scotland Twitter feed is a very helpful source of information in relation to incidents on the transport network. And the emergency services clearly have significant followings emerging, which can assist in informing members of the public about relevant and important issues.
Question 6, Neil Findlay.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it considers that Scotland's social care system is world-leading.
Cabinet Secretary Alex Neil.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government is very proud of the high-quality social care we have in Scotland and of the dedicated and skilled staff who work hard to support our most vulnerable children, adults and families who are dealing with challenging situations in their lives. The staff delivering a huge variety of support and services are employed by a range of different organisations in the statutory, voluntary and independent sectors across Scotland. All of these providers undertake a range of activities to ensure that services are of a high quality and deliver good outcomes for users of services, improving life chances and enabling people to live longer, healthier and independent lives.
Neil Findlay.
The White Paper states that an independent Scotland will continue to provide high-quality, world-leading social care. In relation to adult social care, does the Cabinet Secretary really believe that statement? Does he believe that a system that exists on the basis of low pay, poor working conditions, limited training, care visits that are now, according to Age Scotland, in some cases down to 7 minutes, is world-leading? If he does, he's simply not living in the real world.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I see Mr Findlay's full of his usual Christmas cheer. Can I tell him that I've actually commissioned Healthcare Improvement Scotland and the Care Inspectorate to develop a new model of strategic inspections for adult services across Scotland, taking into consideration, amongst other things, some of the issues he mentioned. And in particular, I have asked them to look at the commissioning of 15-minute or less visits to identify and get to the bottom of why some of these issues are arising in certain areas, not least those controlled by the Labour Party.
Question number 7, Jim Eadie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what measures there are for young disabled adults to access bespoke respite services.
Cabinet Secretary Alex Neil.
Presiding Officer, we are funding the Better Breaks programme to provide responsive and creative short breaks for disabled children and young people up to the age of 20 with multiple support needs. If projects including some young adults over the age of 20, they can be considered for funding. We are also funding the Take a Break programme, which provides grants directly to families with disabled children and young people up to the age of 20. We are considering whether Better Breaks and Take a Break should be available next year to young disabled adults, as well as to children and young people and their carers. A decision will be made in time for next year's programmes. I am aware of the issue around suitable bespoke respite services for young adults, particularly in view of the age limit for CHAS services. My officials will be considering options and will report to me with recommendations early in the new year.
Jim Eadie.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, but has he considered Robert Watson's public petition, which highlights the gap in the provision of respite care for young disabled adults? And will he encourage health boards and local authorities to do what is necessary to provide the bespoke respite services that are required, whether that means pooling budgets or adopting a funding model similar to that used to fund the existing children's hospices in Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, my officials will be working in the new year with a view to taking this issue forward, and we will consider the views of Robert Watson's petition and the model suggested by CHAS. As Commissioners of Care, local authorities and NHS boards have the statutory responsibility to determine the requirements of local services and to provide or commission services. Each local authority and health board will decide on their own priorities and how best to address the need for respite.
Jackie Baillie.
As it's Christmas, will the Minister commission research to establish the number of young adults who need those bespoke respite services so that the policy responses he spoke about are evidence-based?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I'm always willing to listen to the good fairy godmother, Jackie Beale. And she makes a very good suggestion, one which we've already implemented and are already trying to quantify the demand for such services amongst that group. But in the spirit of Christmas, I'm prepared to give her the credit for her press release that no doubt will be hitting the streets as we speak.
As if. Question number 8, Ian Gray.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide support for the proposed Centre for Innovation that is to be based in Edinburgh and named after the Nobel laureate Professor Peter Higgs.
Cabinet Secretary Michael Russell.
Presiding Officer, we of course welcome the recognition that Professor Higgs is now receiving as a result of his deserved Nobel Award and the inspiration that this is providing to the next generation of physicists. The Scottish Government is therefore committed to supporting the Higgs legacy, and I am delighted to announce today that via the Scottish Funding Council we are further supporting that legacy through a £2 million contribution to the proposed Higgs Centre for Ideas and an additional £2 million to support postgraduate study in physics or mathematics.
Ian Gray.
Those are welcome announcements in recognition of Professor Higgs' marvellous achievement, but they are leveraged, of course, by the funding of £11 million through the Science and Technology Facilities Council, which allows the Centre for Innovation to be set up. Will the Cabinet Secretary not agree with me that it is that combination of devolved and reserved funding and effort which makes us strongest, something that would be foolish to jeopardise by removing Scotland from the United Kingdom?
Cabinet Secretary.
I do think it's quite significant, Presiding Officer, that there was no applause from the Labour benches for £4 million for the Higgs Centre. There was applause for that unfortunate partisan welcome for that £4 million. And I think that actually says it all about the position of the Labour Party. They won't welcome investment in excellence in Scottish education. They'll only welcome their own spokesperson who wants to run it down. Can I say, for the avoidance of doubt, that research has no boundaries? That's what it says in the White Paper. Research has no boundaries either between Scotland, England or internationally. Research excellence in Scotland has no boundaries. The work that Peter Higgs has done had no boundaries. And that is the way we should go forward with research, rather than the narrow partisan view we've just heard from Ian Gray.
Question number 9, Mary Fee.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how the Social Care Self-Directed Support Scotland Act 2013 supports carers.
Cabinet Secretary Alex Neil.
Presiding Officer, the Social Care Self-Directed Support Scotland Act, which will come into force on the 1st of April 2014, provides a power for local authorities to support carers. At the discretion of local authorities, carers can be offered a choice of one of the 4 options for self-directed support as set out in the statute. Regulations about the waiving of charges for support to carers under the Act and the accompanying guidance will come into force also next April.
Mary Fee.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer? We know that the festive period can be stressful for most people and additionally stressful for carers. What steps has the Cabinet Secretary taken to provide additional respite and to improve access to respite for both paid and unpaid carers at this time of year?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the member will be aware of the whole range of actions that we have taken to support carers in Scotland and also indeed in the self-directed support bill, where we have made it absolutely clear about policy in relation to charging carers for services that they receive in their role as carers, i.e. such charges do not need to be made. And as a member will also be aware, we have already announced our intention to introduce to this Parliament over the next 18 months or so a carers bill which will further enhance the rights of carers in Scotland.
Question number 10, Gil Patterson.
Many thanks, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what benefits the Commonwealth Games will bring to the west of Scotland.
Briefly, Minister.
BIG 2014 Communities Programme has awarded almost £650,000 to around 430 community programmes, 55 businesses have won games-related contracts, and 4 projects have been awarded £223,000 through the Active Places Fund, complementing the 26 community sports hubs already in place. That's a small sample of the work going on. I would encourage Mr Patterson, along with other members, to visit the Legacy 2014 website, where they can get more details in their area.
Briefly, Mr Patterson.
Thanks for that, Minister. There's been some chatter in the press about legacy, or one paper in fact. Could the Minister provide details on how the Government plans on measuring the legacy of the Commonwealth Games?
Minister.
Right. Well, our Assessing Legacy 2014 website tracks the Games Legacy outcome indicators and reports every 6 months on progress against the 48 legacy programmes. The progress as at the end of September will be published on the Assessing Legacy 2014 website later today.
Thank you. We now move to First Minister's questions.